You wake up every morning with a mask already on. Not the one the world sees, smiling, polite, composed, but the one you wear in front of yourself. It's the silent agreement you make each day to not feel too much, question too much, or remember too much. Somewhere deep inside you, a war is happening. You don't speak of it, and perhaps you don't even know its name. But it's there, burning, clawing, pulling you in two different directions. You feel it when you're alone in a crowded room, when laughter surrounds you, but something underneath your skin begins to ache, when you're praised for your success, but feel a gnawing emptiness that no accomplishment can silence, when you want to cry for no reason, or lash out with rage you can't justify. It's subtle. It doesn't scream, it whispers. And yet, it controls everything. There's a part of you that wants peace, simplicity, comfort, the warm safety of certainty. But there's another part, darker, deeper, that wants more. Not more pleasure or power, more truth, more realness, more authenticity, even if it means pain. This is the paradox of being human. The craving for both security and destruction, belonging and solitude, numbness and feeling, silence and revelation. Why do you long to be loved, yet push people away when they get too close? Why do you fear being judged, yet silently judge yourself far more cruelly than anyone else ever could? Why do you want to heal, yet secretly hold on to your wounds like they're sacred? These are not questions of personality or preference. They're symptoms of something ancient and universal. A civil war in the psyche. A quiet battlefield that stretches across your soul. And though it is invisible, it leaves real scars on your relationships, your ambitions, your joy, your sense of identity. Some call it the war between ego and soul. Others say it's the fractured child within battling the performative adult. Jung might call it the clash between the shadow and the persona. Nietzsche might say it's the will to truth strangled by the will to conform. But whatever name you give it, this war rages on. Relentless, merciless, and mostly silent. It's the war that makes you question your worth in moments of triumph. The war that whispers you're a fraud. The war that sabotages connection, insists on perfection, and keeps you addicted to things that numb you, because to feel fully would be too dangerous. So here's the question. What if the greatest battles of your life were never fought in the outside world, but inside you? What if the chaos, the anxiety, the self-doubt weren't signs of weakness, but signals from a deeper intelligence trying to break free? You've been taught to fear this war, to suppress it, to hide it behind smiles and goals and distractions. But what if the only way to peace was through the heart of this inner conflict? Let's step closer, into the silence, into the war. Because only there, beneath the noise and beyond the masks, will you begin to see the truth. The silence isn't empty, it's crowded, with ghosts of everything you've denied, abandoned, or buried just deep enough to function. And what's worse, you've been trained, conditioned, to believe that these ghosts are shameful, that acknowledging them is weakness, that peace comes from suppression, not confrontation. But psychology whispers a more unsettling truth. What you repress doesn't disappear. It waits. It festers. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the disowned self, made of every impulse, fear, memory, and truth you weren't allowed to express. Not because you were evil, but because you were human in a world that demanded perfection. As a child, you sensed early what emotions earned love and which ones risked rejection. So you learned to perform. You smiled when you felt sad. You obeyed when you wanted to scream. You became who they needed you to be, not who you truly were. That's where the war began, not with trauma or tragedy, but with tiny betrayals of the self, repeated so often that eventually you forgot they even happened. And now, you carry the consequences. Anxiety becomes your compass, perfectionism your prison. You long for authenticity, but don't know where you lost it. And beneath all this is a fear you can barely name. What if my real self is unlovable? But this isn't just personal, it's philosophical. Friedrich Nietzsche warned that society doesn't reward truth, it punishes it. That conformity is the price of acceptance. And so we build systems, religions, ideologies, institutions, not to free us but to protect us from the terror of freedom itself. Because to be truly free is to choose, without anyone to blame. To look into your own eyes and see both the divine and the monstrous, and still say yes. To live not by habit or inheritance, but by your own internal compass, even if it means exile. And most people can't do that, so they create false selves to survive. Identities rooted in titles, tribes, and beliefs that were never truly theirs. They wear masks not just in public, but in the mirror. And slowly, imperceptibly, they become strangers to themselves. This is the silent war between the self you created to survive and the self buried beneath it, screaming to be seen. Jean-Paul Sartre would say you are condemned to be free, that your existence comes with the unbearable weight of responsibility. But rather than face it, most choose bad faith, a kind of self-deception where you pretend you're not free, where you pretend the war isn't there, where you numb the existential tension with distractions, status, or borrowed beliefs. Arthur Schopenhauer offered a darker take, that human desire itself is the root of suffering, that every time you strive for fulfillment in the outer world, you deepen the inner void, that the war doesn't end with achievement, it escalates, because now you must defend a mask that was never you to begin with. And here's the brutal irony. The smarter you are, the more dangerous this war becomes. Why? Because intelligence brings awareness, and awareness, without integration, becomes torment. You see the cracks in the system, the hypocrisy of culture, the absurdity of your own patterns, and yet you're still bound to them. You understand the cage but can't find the key. This is the philosopher's curse. To know deeply, but feel powerless to act. To wake up in a dream you can't control, and yet know. This dream was shaped by your own avoidance. The war intensifies when you can no longer pretend, when the persona cracks under pressure, when the inner voice becomes louder than the world's applause. And in that moment, the question isn't, how do I win, but which self must die for the other to live. This isn't a war you win by force. It's a war you survive by understanding, by going inward, by facing the unbearable truths you once buried. And so, the journey begins, not to escape the war, but to understand its origin. Because only by understanding the architecture of your internal prison can you begin to dismantle it. But the question remains, what happens when you ignore this war for too long? What does it cost? Your relationships, your joy, your very sense of reality. Let's step deeper into the battlefield. At first, the damage is quiet. You don't notice it as you brush your teeth, as you nod politely at small talk, as you laugh at jokes that don't reach your soul. You're functioning, getting things done. People even admire you. They say you're successful, composed, reliable. But beneath that well-maintained surface, something is decaying. The war inside you doesn't make noise in the beginning. It whispers, through chronic tension in your shoulders, through sleepless nights and sudden emotional voids, through a vague sense that life is happening to you, not through you, like you're an actor in someone else's script. You scroll for hours, not for entertainment, but to escape. You cling to productivity, not for passion, but to avoid stillness. Because stillness is dangerous. It threatens to introduce you to the parts of yourself you've been evading for years. This is where the silent war shows its teeth. And it's not just emotional, it's biological. When you repress parts of yourself, you don't just bury thoughts, you disrupt your entire nervous system. The body becomes a battlefield. Cortisol floods your bloodstream in anticipation of threats that never come. Your immune system weakens, your gut rebels, you age faster. The war doesn't stay inside. It leaks into your relationships, where you begin to project your disowned parts onto others. You accuse your partner of being controlling, when it's really your own need for control. You criticize others for being shallow, because you're afraid of being seen as fragile. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But most people don't want understanding. They want someone else to blame. And so they never see it. How much of their reality is not real, but constructed by layers of avoidance, trauma, conditioning. They live in illusions designed to protect them from pain, and then suffer, because illusions cannot nourish the soul. Think of the cognitive biases at work here. Confirmation bias ensures you only see what supports your defense mechanisms. Cognitive dissonance keeps you loyal to beliefs that no longer serve you. The sunk cost fallacy traps you in identities you've outgrown, because you've already invested too much in them. You don't realize you're imprisoned, Because the walls are invisible. Even worse, you decorate the cell with achievements, with status symbols, with followers and degrees. But deep down, something still feels hollow. Because what you are is not aligned with who you really are. Society doesn't help. It rewards the mask. It praises the performative self. And if you start to crack, if you dare to be vulnerable, it pathologizes you. You're too sensitive. Overthinking. Going through a phase. But this war is not a phase. It's the root of every addiction, every midlife crisis, every existential dread that strikes in the middle of an otherwise ordinary day. You could be driving to work, watching a movie, holding someone you love, and suddenly the void swallows you. That terrifying question rises again. Is this all there is? You panic, not because life is unbearable, but because it is bearable, and yet still feels empty. That's the cruelest trick of the silent war. You survive, but you do not live. You appear whole, but feel fragmented. You achieve, but never arrive. And eventually you begin to fear yourself, because you sense that if you were ever truly still, truly honest, it might all fall apart. But here's the truth. It needs to fall apart. Because the life you're clinging to wasn't built on your deepest values. It was built on strategies of survival, on appeasement, on fear, on the belief that you are not enough as you are. And so you live on autopilot. You numb, you conform, you distract, you survive, but you do not choose. And what's worse, without even knowing it, you begin to pass the war down to your children, your students, your followers. You teach them by example that to be accepted, they must hide. That wholeness is dangerous. That truth is optional. This is how the war becomes generational, cultural, systemic. And unless interrupted, it keeps going. Because no one told you that you could stop fighting. That the goal isn't to win the war, but to dissolve it by facing what you fear the most, yourself. So now the question sharpens. How do you escape a war you fought your entire life, but never chose to start? Can there be freedom, not just from the world, but from the inner chains you forged to survive it? Let's find out. To break free, you don't need more strength. You need surrender. Not the kind that waves a white flag and gives up, but the kind that lets go of the illusion that you've ever been in control of the battlefield. The rebellion begins the moment you stop running from yourself. The moment you no longer fear your own chaos. Because the truth is this: you've been at war with your shadow, not your enemy. And your shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to integrate with you. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That's where your rebellion starts, not by changing the world, but by changing the way you see what's inside you. You've spent years curating a personality, an acceptable self, polished for survival. But behind that curated version is a vast and untamed self, raw, contradictory, wild with desire and pain and power. That's the part you were taught to hide, and it's the part that will set you free. But freedom doesn't come without fire. You must be willing to burn the script you were handed. You must be willing to disappoint others, to outgrow your own past, to become unrecognizable to the very people who once celebrated your mask. That's the price of truth. So how does one rebel against the silent war? Not through violence, not through external defiance, but through radical self-honesty. Ask yourself the questions you've always avoided. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I truly desire, beyond what's acceptable? Which parts of me have I silenced to be loved, approved, or safe? These are dangerous questions, because only by facing the truth of your inner fragmentation can you begin to reassemble yourself, not into who you were told to be, but into who you were always meant to become. This is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." Chaos is not your enemy. It is your raw material. But be warned, the world will not celebrate your awakening. The moment you start living in alignment, you will lose the favor of the systems built on conformity. You may lose people, status, security, but what you gain will be incomparable. A mind that is no longer at war with itself, a body that breathes without armor, a soul that no longer whispers for rescue in the middle of the night. You become dangerous, not to others, but to the systems that depended on your silence. Your peace becomes an act of rebellion, your authenticity, a threat to every lie you once upheld. Think of the philosophers who walked this path. Viktor Frankl, who found meaning in a concentration camp. Soren Kierkegaard, who rejected the herd and embraced subjectivity as truth. Simone Weil, who sacrificed comfort to feel the suffering of the world and meet God through affliction. Thich Nhat Hanh, who taught that peace begins with breathing, here, not there. None of them had it easy, but they had something most never find: clarity. Clarity is born in rebellion, not against others, but against the inner machinery of self-deception. And here's the most radical shift of all. You do not need to be fixed. You need to be found. You are not broken. You are divided. And your healing begins the moment you stop trying to choose between your darkness and your light, and learn to hold them both. Wholeness doesn't look like perfection. It looks like complexity. It looks like a man who knows he is capable of cruelty and chooses gentleness, like a woman who knows she has been tamed and reclaims her wildness, like a soul who knows it can no longer fit into the small room of social expectation and finally kicks the door down. This is your rebellion, and it is terrifying, and it is beautiful, but most importantly, it is yours. So now ask yourself, if this war inside you was never truly about right and wrong, if the real battle was between illusion and truth, between what you were told to be and who you truly are, then maybe the question isn't, how do I win? Maybe the real question is, what am I finally willing to lose in order to be free? What if the war was never meant to end? What if the final peace you've been chasing, through self-help, spiritual practices, ambition, love, or silence, was not a destination, but a mirage? You've walked through deserts of longing, climbed mountains of self-discipline, meditated through sleepless nights hoping for that one moment of divine clarity where all the inner noise goes quiet. And yet, the silence never lasts, does it? Here's the truth most never tell you. There is no final victory. And that's not a curse. That's freedom. The ultimate realization is not that you will conquer your darkness. It's that your darkness is not separate from your light. The war you fight is not between good and evil, weak and strong, fear and courage, but between your refusal to feel and your deep need to be felt. You were never supposed to win the war inside you. You were meant to understand it, to see it not as a flaw but as a map. Your anxiety, a signal that your boundaries have been violated; your depression, a cry that your soul is starving for meaning; your anger, a wildfire born from lifetimes of swallowed truth; your doubt, a whisper from your higher self, begging you not to settle for lies. Do you see it now? Everything inside you that feels broken is actually pointing you home. You've been taught to numb the signals, medicate the symptoms, bury the voices. But what if the real insanity is pretending they don't matter? Viktor Frankl said, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure." That's how most people survive, drifting between shallow highs, afraid to look beneath the surface because they know what's waiting. But you are different. You've stared into the abyss. You've seen the cracks in the perfect life. You've heard the scream behind the polite smile. That makes you dangerous, not because you're broken, but because you are awake. And here's where the ultimate paradox comes in. The war inside you is not the enemy. It's the invitation. It's the force that carves out space inside your soul, large enough to hold both joy and sorrow. It's the wound that teaches you to feel without shame. It's the uncertainty that keeps you humble, searching, human. Without it, you would be numb, plastic, empty. So the final revelation is not that you must fight harder. It's that you must listen deeper. You are not here to be clean or fixed or pure. You are here to be whole, to be the trembling hands that still reach out, the voice that speaks truth even while shaking, the flawed heart that keeps opening, again and again, even after it has been shattered. Because maybe the real victory isn't the end of pain, but the beginning of intimacy with it. Maybe true strength isn't immunity to suffering, but the courage to let it shape you without turning you bitter. Maybe enlightenment isn't floating above the battlefield, but standing in it, soul bared, heart raw, and still choosing love. You will still feel lost sometimes. You will still hear the voices of doubt. But now, you'll recognize them, not as enemies, but as echoes. Echoes of the child you were, the dreams you buried, the truths you feared. And that recognition? That's where the war ends, not with silence, but with integration. You will live the rest of your life with these contradictions. You will never become one thing. And that's the point. You are not a finished statue. You are a breathing paradox, sacred and messy, broken and luminous, a question without an answer. And that's exactly what makes you human. So now the final question is not, how do I fix myself? It's, am I willing to walk with every part of me, especially the ones I was taught to exile? Can you sit with your fear without needing to kill it? Can you hold your shame without making it wrong? Can you let your longing burn without smothering it with distraction? Because that is freedom, not perfection, not resolution, but the fierce, honest, holy work of showing up every single day for the silent war that made you who you are. This is not a conclusion. It's a beginning. A new kind of life, rooted not in certainty, but in presence. Not in triumph, but in truth. Not in avoidance, but in the sacred art of staying. So ask yourself one last time, can you be the one who finally listens? Because if you can, then maybe, just maybe, the war has already done its job. And now, you're ready to live.